another edition of Big Time Memories. My esteemed co-host, Mr. Dave Drayson, manager to the Stars. How you doing?
Very good. How about you today?
Doing great. We want to thank all the people out there for the feedback. Keep it coming to RoX-TV, and we'll try our best to answer your questions or to deal with subjects, people that you want to hear about.
Yes, we've been getting tons of mail. I mean, the response has been great, and we really appreciate you taking the time to, listen to me and Terry tell our memories, and that's what this is all about. Big time memories.
Big time memories. And today, another one of the biggest stars ever in big time wrestling.
Oh boy, this guy was something to behold. Killer Brooks. Oh man, was he something. And
He
what a
was.
great guy too he was to us.
He truly was, honestly, the best friend I had in wrestling, the best wrestler friend that I had. He was just an amazing guy, just a real, I don't want to call him a sweetheart necessarily, but a good fella. I mean, just a good guy.
Yep. And, well, his name is really Timothy Brooks. He was born December 4th, 1947, in Waxahachie, Texas. When he was young, I had interviewed him at one point some years back. And I asked him, did you watch wrestling as a kid? And he says in the first and second grade, he used to watch wrestling on TV down in Texas because he would watch his uncle, Frankie Murdoch, who is the father of Dirty Dick Murdoch. And Dick Murdoch and Tim Brooks were cousins. A lot of people didn't know that.
Yeah. And that was his end to the business.
And Tim played football in high school. And right out of high school, he went into a 3-year hitch in the Army.
When he was in the Army, one of the things he did, he was a military policeman.
Oh.
Talking about miscasting.
Yeah, and he liked to beat up the guys too.
Imagine that.
Yeah, he was a ruffian,
Yeah.
and that's what he said. He used to like to, beat up on those guys when they misbehaved. So, along with Dick Murdoch, who trained Killer Brooks, but his first match, he wasn't really trained yet to become a wrestler. It happened in Odessa, Texas, 1969. He went to the matches with his cousin, Dick Murdoch, and one of the guys didn't show up, and they needed one other person for the Battle Royal. So he says, Tim, come on, change into some, gear. We'll borrow you some gear, and you go into the Battle Royal. Don't worry about it. You just go in, and we'll throw you out, no problem. Well, he says, okay. So he goes into this Battle Royal, and after it was over, he was like one of the first to get thrown out, but he says every one of those guys got some slugs in on the rookie kid.
That was his initiation. That happens an awful lot. Yeah.
And it was not even a week later, he's with Dick Murdoch at TV tapings, and somehow, again, one of the guys doesn't show up. And they said, Tim, you got to go in the ring. And he goes, I'm not even trained. So Dick Murdoch takes him and shows him some holds, some really quick holds, because TV, squash matches, what we called them back in the day, they're not going much over 5 minutes anyway. So Dick Murdoch shows Tim some holds, and, he says, okay, I think I could do this. And then he finds out who his first opponent is as a singles performer.
Uh-oh.
Dory Funk Jr.
Oh, no.
He said that young kid just turned him into a knot. Tim did the job for him.
Yeah.
Dory Funk got his hand raised, but that was his initiation that first week, a battle royal and going against Dory Funk Jr.
Dory Funk, known as one of the most skillful scientific wrestlers of all time. One of the best ever.
Well, talking about big time in big time wrestling, Tim Brooks made his Detroit debut July 11th, 1970, as Tim Brooks in the Kobo wrestling ring against Mitsu Arakawa.
Sure.
Mitsu got his hand raised. Tim, was his first time here, as didn't have too many matches under his belt, but he was sent here to the Sheik to learn. And even though Dick Murdoch basically trained him from the start, Tim Brook also credits the Sheik with training him over
Right.
time. He used to train him at his house in Williamston.
And as a side note, there was another rather famous young man who did that same thing, was brought into this territory to learn. You remember who that was?
Tell me.
Babyface Nelson.
Yeah, we're going to get to that one at some point.
He became Greg the Hammer Valentine, but got his start here.
Yep, as a manager
Coming in to learn.
As a manager for Donnie Fargo.
Yeah. You learn by doing. You learn by getting experience. You get your experience in a territory like this.
And then, Tim basically was an enhancement talent. He appeared on the Kobo shows, learning his craft, getting beat, of course, appear on TV, getting beat, of course. And he wanted to change. He wanted to go to that next step and try to become a star. And in late 1970, he changed his whole persona. He put on, a black vest and black everything, and he wore a black mask. And he was called the Bounty Hunter.
And he had the noose.
Right, he had the noose. But that only lasted, a couple of months. Because on January 23rd, 1971, he made his debut as Killer Brooks. And he started to, get some victories under his belt. He really started to, know how to go in there, perform,
make the people mad.
Make the people mad and bring the people in.
He had that nasty, smelly cigar. And,
that elbow pad. I don't
God.
think he washed that thing the whole time I've ever known him.
All the rides that I took with him, and he lived in Williamston where the office was, and so did I. And most of the towns were south, so we would ride together. And he'd start one of those nasty cigars, and they last hours, and it's just like awful.
And he'd get that thing right down to the butt too, and the end of it was just soaked, and he's spitting out. He always had a spit cup too. Remember that darn spit cup? That thing would be full by the time you'd get to the next town.
Yeah.
But one thing that I did. Sometimes I'd interview the guys in the dressing room, while they were getting dressed, just to get a few ideas, for when I was doing stories for the body press. And this one time, Brooks said, we started, talking things. He says, what we should do is go to a cemetery and take pictures of me at a cemetery, And I said, yeah, that'd be pretty crazy. So the next issue of the body press, I did a story. And I still remember it. It says, the title of it was, Is Killer Brooks Crazy? And it's like, right then and there, that night, and for months on end, the fans started chanting, Crazy Brooks. Crazy Brooks. And he'd hold his ears and stuff, and, they just stop. And it brought the fans in.
Yeah.
And also he had Eddie Creechman as his manager back then.
Creechman saying, don't call him crazy.
Yeah. So, so many things just started to, steamroll for him.
Yeah.
And at one point, I think it's his only championship that he ever had, belt, when he won the tag team championship with Ben Justice, after Ben Justice, turned heel on the Stomper, which was another whole story for us to tell.
Yeah. They won from Louis Martinez and Flying Fred Curry.
Right.
Won the tag team titles.
Well, yeah. And you know how the story on that one is Fred Curry came out, but he had a mystery partner.
All right, yeah.
And nobody knew who it was.
Right.
And when they came out to the ring, there's Louis Martinez, and there was another gentleman under basically a bed sheet.
Yeah.
Just all white in the bed sheet and barefoot. So nobody knew who it was until the ending, I think, the finish of the match was.
No, it was before the match started.
Yeah, I know, but I'm saying the finish. I mean, because this gentleman, worked in this, hood bed sheet kind of thing the whole time. And he did 7 drop kicks in a row on Killer Brooks, got the pin, and they revealed him as Flying Fred Curry.
Yep. The new World Tag Team Champions then, Louis and Freddie.
Yeah. And,
Absolutely.
Just so many stories to tell about him.
He was a great interview too.
Oh, he was a
Had-
great interview.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
He was really put a lot of thought into the interviews. They were very creative, very different from a lot of the others. One of the most famous interviews that I can remember doing with him was one night in Dayton. He and Marino had fought one of the probably 1,000 matches that they wrestled each other, and Brooks had brutalized Marino. It was a blood fest. Marino was all bloody. So the next day, we were in the studio in Williamston recording promos for the next Dayton card and a bunch of other cities as well. And Brooks comes out for his interview. He's going to talk. You know where I'm going with this? He's going to talk about what he's going to do to Marino in the rematch next Monday at the Hera Arena in Dayton. He says to me, "Did you see what I did to Marino the last time at the Hera Arena?" And I said, "Yeah, you brutalized him. It was awful. It was nasty." And he says, he pulls out a little piece of bologna and holds it up to the camera and said, "You know what this is? This is Marino's skin." And he ate it. Oh, God.
That was
Gross.
a great one. And also, you know, one of the promo things that I also remember with him, we're up in Williamston doing them at the office. And just before Pampero Firpo was going out to do a promo, Brooks, smoking his cigar, of course, he takes a big hit of that cigar, and unknown to Pampero, he went behind him and he blew all the cigar smoke in his hair. So Firpo goes up there, and I think it was Bob Finnegan starts interviewing him, and this smoke is coming out of his hair everywhere, and he had no idea.
Oh, that's classic.
Oh, and
Yeah.
you know, I've told the story about me and him riding mini bikes at the Sheik's house and
Right,
going through Sheik's
yeah.
garden and never finding out about it, and you know, the road trips and the times me, Jack Kane, Don Kent, and Killer Brooks, we'd go golfing before shows. You know, we just had a great time with them.
Yeah.
And you know, another little unknown fact wrestling fans may not know, Killer Brooks was the best man at Eddie Farhat Jr., who was Captain Ed George. He was
That's
the
right.
best man at his wedding when he was
yeah.
married to, this gal was a sweetheart. Remember Connie?
Absolutely,
His
yeah.
wife at the time.
Real sweetie,
She was great.
I wasn't invited to the wedding.
Really?
No, I got to go to Cincinnati that night instead of coming to the wedding. But the cool part about it was the reception was the next day.
Right.
And that's where you got one of the all-time most famous pictures to me of the Sheik in his brand new tailored wedding suit, along with his managers Eddie Creechman and
Abdullah Farouk.
Ernie Roth.
Oh, that's one of my most stolen pictures on
That's
the internet.
true.
I'll say
That's right.
that.
Yeah.
But, you know, through Brooks was just a sensation, you know, main eventing. His bouts with, you know, Tony Marino were just epic. They were just beat fest. They just beat each other to
Oh, they
death.
did.
But they were great to watch.
Yeah.
You know, but in late 1974, if you could tell this story, because you know the inside, there was a time when Killer Brooks, Tony Marino, Ben Justice, Dr. Beach, Jack Kane, and Terry Sullivan
Louis Martinez.
didn't show up for a Kobo show. What happened?
Well, not one of the best decisions that any of us ever made. There was, as there always is, a dispute about payoffs. And everybody was basically we were being sold the idea that we were not being paid enough, that we needed to start our own promotion, and that we would get all of the Sheik's TVs because Jack Kane had all the contracts in his name. Never happened, but that's the bill of goods that we were sold before we went ahead and did this. Everybody kicked in some money, so we're all going to be owners of this new company, and we're all going to get rich. No, didn't happen.
And it was called the Universal Wrestling Association, right? Oh, and I forgot to mention Karl von Schatz was also.
He came in eventually, yeah.
And then who else came in eventually? With, I think, you know, with your, you know, talking and, you know, my friendships with all those guys, it was my first opportunity to really, try to learn my craft as a manager. And I'm forever indebted to you, Brooks, Marino, and those guys for giving me an opportunity to first become a manager.
And the people hated you, David.
Well,
The people, you were always with your back to the crowd, and everybody was taking shots at you.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the dangers of the game,
Oh.
But if anything, I did my job.
You did, absolutely. That's why they took the shots at you.
And I got to manage Killer Brooks at one point, in Toledo, Ohio. I'll never forget this. It's one of the very first times I ever wrestled. I think the very only time I ever wrestled. The story goes like this. I get to the Tam O'Shanter, was the arena that we were doing
In
that
Toledo,
night.
right.
And I walk in and, Jack Kane and Brooks come up to me and says, "Hey, you got your gear?" Well, I got my, outfits that I would wear out to the ring to manage my guys. And, I'm thinking, gear? What do you mean gear? Well, yeah, you need your wrestling gear today. And I thought this was a joke. And it's like, no, Brooks and Drayson are going against Tony Marino and Jack Kane. I go, what? So it's like, yeah, you got to get some gear. And I was so small back then. I only weighed 142 pounds, so I couldn't borrow any of the guys, anything. But Mickey Doyle did borrow me his boots. But there was a fan there who I knew, and she was about my size. And I says, do you have anything, at home that, that would fit me? So we took off real quick, before the show started. We went to her house. I got these pink hot pants, some like fishnet nylon kind of things. And I got back to the arena, put that on, and, we were discussing, what was going to happen in the match. And the match itself, I go out and people are seeing me, and I have a coat on. And every time I, try to take my coat off, people are, catcalling and whistling, and, I'd put it back on. So we were, milking that at the start. And then it's like I'm taunting, Jack Kane and Tony Marino. And, it's like, yeah, like, what am I going to do? So Brooks gets this idea. He says, get down and do some push-ups. And I'm like, Jesus, how many? I can maybe do one or two if I'm lucky. But I get down, I start to do a push-up, and I feel in the back of my trunks, Brooks put his hand down there, and he's lifting me up and down. And I'm just going like this, impressing, not only myself, but the fans. And they thought it was a hoot. And, long story short, I got in a couple of times, and I took, a big, suplex from Marino, and the fans were they went nuts, loved it. And that was my one-time wrestling. We lost a match, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was. And you're right, the crowd ate it up.
And right after that, when our promotion folded, Tim Brooks started traveling the territory.
One of the saddest days of my life was seeing him leave that promotion, because in my head I knew this is the end. Without Brooks, we're not going to make it.
Yeah, he went to the Northwest, made a name for himself there. He went down to Florida, made a name for himself there. He went to Georgia, made a name for himself there. Went to the Gulf Coast, made a name for himself there. And then he went to Texas, where he really exploded again.
Yeah.
One of his managers, one of the greats of all time, Playboy Gary Hart.
Sure.
Managed him there, took him to new heights that even bigger than here in, our big time wrestling area.
Do you remember the story when he was in Georgia, Georgia Championship Wrestling, WTBS 605 Saturday nights? Everybody remembers that. One story that I remember about Brooks, this is when Ole Anderson was in charge and Jim Barnett was basically the owner of the promotion. He'd just come back from Australia. And it was Brooks and Larry Zbyszko were a team. And Larry Zbyszko was sort of the brains, and Brooks was more or less the brawn of this team. So they had a match on WTBS for the National Heavyweight Championship, which was held at that time by Paul Orndorff. Mm-hmm. And Brooks beat Paul Orndorff on television, and then he sold the championship to Larry Zbyszko.
Oh, wow. That's a great one.
Yeah.
And I remember also that at one point He went up to Montreal for a very brief time and reunited with Eddie Creechman,
Yeah.
but not as Killer or Crazy Brooks. He was Buster Brody
Buster.
as Buster Brody, and he was tag teaming with the great Bruiser Brody. It only lasted for a short time, but he was Buster Brody. And another memory that pops into my head, Terry, you did the Alaska tour
Oh, yeah.
of Big Time Wrestling, and you were with Killer Brooks there, weren't you?
Yeah, you can see the picture here. We flew in the plane to Alaska. It was somebody's great idea that nothing happens in Alaska. And since for some unknown reason we had television in Anchorage and Fairbanks, the Big Time Wrestling show was seen there, that we should do a tour of Alaska. A lot of promoters had tried running Alaska, not all that much success at all. But we decided we would go up there, and the way we went, Bobo was on the tour. Bad News Beach
Yep.
was there. Brooks, myself, Marino, Lou Klein, Al
Bull Curry.
Costello, Bull. Yeah, the Bull was on the tour too. But yeah, it was not a very lucrative tour, but nonetheless gave me a chance to see Alaska. Just a beautiful place.
Well, the reason, it was a better success than anybody else because that was at a time when they were building the oil pipeline and you were entertaining the guys who were building the pipeline.
Right. And we were there during the summer. Not that people in Alaska would want to do something other than come and sit in a building during the summer, but hey, what did we know?
But I heard it was very expensive.
Yeah.
So this is 1974 and it was very expensive up there.
Yeah, it was, because all the food has to be shipped in. So consequently, you're paying not only for the food, but also shipping costs.
Well, after Killer Brooks left Big Time Wrestling and all the other territories, he went back home and settled in his hometown of Waxahachie, Texas, and he opened up a wrestling school. And then he also started to promote shows in Dallas and Fort Worth after Fritz von Erich had given up. So he had a successful promotion and he had a nice wrestling school that he trained a lot of guys who started to go out and, make a name for themselves.
He had some very notable trainees, a couple of whom, one was Awesome Kong, this big, huge 400-pounder who wrestled mainly in the USWA that came out of Texas back in the, 80s. Mm-hmm. And another guy who is active today, very active today in WWE, and has very publicly credited Killer Brooks with training him, is Keith Lee.
Right. But as all good things must come to an end, he retired in 1997. He couldn't do ring work anymore. He still had his school for a while. He dabbled in that a little bit, still tried, because it was very hard back in those days to get TV.
Yeah.
TV used to be, you get a free show, in the studio, and the TV station would make their money off of the ads or the commercials, but then TV stations got wise and things were changing. And, if you wanted to be on TV, you had to pay. And it wasn't, cheap to do that at the time.
One of the interesting things about Tim Brooks is that here in this area, in the Detroit area, he was a top star. He was always the number 2 bad guy behind the Sheik, right? Badder than anybody, basically. But after Detroit, he never really achieved that same level of success in any of the other territories. And he very publicly admits these days that was because he had his demons. He was very heavily into drugs. A couple of his best friends were Bruiser Brody and Roddy Piper, who both at that time were also experimenting a lot. They didn't experiment, they had it mastered.
Yeah.
But Brooks, for a long period of time, was a roommate of Roddy Piper in Charlotte, and candidly admitted that being around Piper took a couple of years off his life. But he gave all that up, regrets ever doing it. He said it never did anything positive for him, and he's sorry it ever happened that way.
After about 30 years of not seeing or hearing or talking to Killer Brooks, I finally reunited with him in 2003 at the Cauliflower Alley Club in Las Vegas. And I knew he was going to be there, but he didn't know I was going to be there. And when, I don't look, now what I looked like back then. I'm a little heavier, little, less hair, and he just didn't know. But when he, found out who I was, we just hugged and talked, and we went up to his room, and I had my recorder, and I interviewed him for 2 hours straight, and just what a conversation we had. And then over time, once in recent years, I knew he was failing in health, lost a lot of weight.
He had cancer.
Yes. And I had, talked to him every couple months. Just call him and we'd talk and we'd laugh and we'd tell stories. And I remember calling you one day and saying, Terry, will you please call Killer Brooks because he wants to talk to you.
I hadn't spoken to him. One of my best friends in the business, but it's just the way things go, the way I am. I don't stay in touch with a lot of people, and I hadn't talked to him in 35 years.
Wow. And glad we did.
Yeah, and I thank you for that. It was a wonderful conversation that we had. We agreed that we would talk to each other about once a month, but sadly, he was gone after about another couple of weeks after I spoke with him. It was a very interesting conversation. I don't think that he would object if I shared just a little bit of it. He said he had made his peace with everyone. He was closer than ever to his family, and he had made his peace with the Lord. And whatever happened, happened. Because at that point in time, he had decided to get off of chemotherapy. It wasn't really helping. People know the effects of that, so he decided just whatever would happen would happen.
And I remember, he told me he was in tears when he got the phone call that was telling him that he was getting inducted into the Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame in the class of 2020. And everybody knows that COVID hit. So the induction ceremonies in Wichita Falls, Texas was canceled. But in late 2020, they held a special dinner that he didn't even know about. A bunch of fans and his friends and stuff got together at a banquet hall, and his wife brought him into the banquet hall, and he thought they were just going to dinner. He walks in, and it's all his friends and everybody's there, and they gave him his Hall of Fame ring and presented it to him at that ceremony. And like you said, he passed away June 30th in the year 2020, and we lost one of the greats. We lost a great friend. And in doing so, Terry, if you can one last time give tribute to Killer Brooks the way only you can.
And the way we all remember him is this big, burly son of a gun who terrorized the rings around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, from Waxahachie, Texas, weighing 255 pounds, Killer Brooks.
Proud to say that I'm a part of IBW.
I take pride in IBW that we are a family-run company.
It's a fight. It's a sport. At IBW, tradition has always mattered.
You're going to see world-class professional big-time wrestling at its best.
This ain't no sports entertainment. This is professional wrestling.
International Big-Time Wrestling's The Fix. Each and every week, your fix of IBW action. You want entertainment? look no further than RoX-TV.
International Bigtime Wrestling!
Wrestling fans, if you like what you've seen, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and also don't forget to ring that bell.